blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments, commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. Now, I think we'll go ahead and get going here as people are coming in. Okay, now tonight we are having troubles with the monitor over here, so keeps jumping in and out, but that's okay. Here's our timeline of all of the kings and the prophets of Israel and Judah, and we're down here actually now, at the end of where Zerubbabel is, and we'll finish it off, kind of like right in here with 516 BCE, and just the things that are covered. I'm going to talk about the book of Ezra mostly, and then next week we'll finish off with the book of Nehemiah, and then what he's got to say in regard to the history of Israel and what they were doing in the end of the exile. Because there's a whole lot of stuff that went on then. I think we talked about it on a couple of weeks about what the beginning of the Talmud, the beginnings of where the Mishnah was started, and then the Gemara and which eventually became known as the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. And there's an awful lot of other things that are going on there, but I didn't want to get into the scope of that as part of the history, because it's basically a kind of a study on its own when you get into talking about all of the rabbis and the schools, the various schools of the rabbis over in Babylon, the former Babylon area, the Babylonian Talmud, as opposed to then the Jerusalem Talmud and the writings that came from Israel itself, and Tiberius and so forth. So that's pretty much a study all its own. And so I wanted to maybe do that another time, but we'll finish off the history next week, and then we'll go over and start doing something different and looking at Corinthians then. Okay, so this again shows you a picture of the Persian Empire, and just how far flung it really was. I mean, it went over into India and up into the Caucasus and all the way over into Macedonia and Libya and so forth. So it was very large and basically unwieldy. It couldn't last for all that long because of they had not developed the infrastructure and so forth that say the Romans did later on, so that lasted hundreds of years. The Babylonian, of course, the Babylonians lasted less than 100 years, and the Persians not too much longer than that. All right, so let's look at. I wanted to look at here's a chronology, and I've got a couple of chronologies here of what where we're going to be looking at. Of course, Cyrus, he issued the decree in 536 to say that, okay, the Jews can go back to Judah, and then they started, they built the altar, started working on the temple, and we're going to talk about the problems that they had on that. And so here is, as you look at this stuff, you might want to try to refer back to it or something. And I've got some other chronologies and timelines too that will help us to kind of fix this in our mind, because when I was studying this thing, it got very, very confusing to me. And I said, well, shoot, if it's confusing to me, then it's probably confusing to everybody else too. So anyway, we've talked about the three returns from exile. There were three basic basic deportations, and now there's three returns that the Zerubbabel and building the temple. Then tonight we'll talk about Ezra, and then next week we'll talk about the wall and Nehemiah and the impact that he had. Okay, so just to kind of get in your mind, the first temple was completed in 966 BCE, and then the second temple, of course, it was destroyed. First temple was destroyed in 586 BCE. So it was basically, it stood for about 400 years. And then you have the second temple that was built or dedicated, finished in, actually it says 520. It was completed in 516 BCE and dedicated in 515 BCE. And so then it lasted then until 70 AD. So it lasted 500 years. And the second temple, Zerubbabel's temple, it was a little bit larger than the Solomon's temple. If you had looked at the comparison of it, it was maybe 50% larger, just the temple part itself. And then, of course, later on, Herod took that temple and then expanded greatly around that with the grounds and so forth. And it was then, with all of the grounds and everything of the second temple, I believe it was about 3 acres under Herod, but that was later on. But the second temple under Zerubbabel was larger than the Solomon's temple. But last week we talked about how that the really old people that came back to Israel from Babylon, some of the older people, they were very upset, disconcerted that the new temple that they're building was not going to be like the old temple at all, because the new temple when Solomon's temple, although it was smaller, it had all the bells and whistles inside. It had like lampstands. It had 10 lampstands inside the holies, the holy place. It had 10 tables of showbread, and all of these gold, and the walls were overlaid with gold. The doors were overlaid with gold, and so it was quite the building. Now the second temple under Zerubbabel, it only had one lampstand, one menorah, and only had one table of showbread, just like the tabernacle only had one lampstand, one table of showbread, one table of incense. Now, the second temple, though, it did not have the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was hidden away or lost, captured and melted down, or something, so that we don't know where it was and what happened to it. Of course, there are people that they say they know where it's at, and you've seen some of the I don't know if you've seen some of the things out there on the internet. Some guy named Ron Wyatt said he saw it, but he had to seal it back up because it was just too wonderful to reveal to the world. But he saw it, and that even saw that it was right up underneath Golgotha, where Yeshua was crucified, and that Yeshua's blood dripped down all the way down through 30 feet of rock and dripped down on top of the Ark of the Covenant. and he scraped up some of the blood on the Ark of the Covenant and had it analyzed, and it only had DNA from one person. It wasn't the combined DNA of a real, of a regular person. So that's because God doesn't have a DNA, and so that would have been Mary's DNA. But he couldn't show you that study because he had turned it over to the Israeli government, and they wouldn't let him display it, and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, there's all sorts of strange things out there. And then other people say, no, the ark is down in Ethiopia. And I saw a picture of that thing, and it looks like just a great big bowl. It doesn't look like what the Bible describes as, the box that's 27 inches or whatever, the 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits and 1.5 cubits high, or something. Whatever it was, looks like the size of say a big foot locker. What I saw of the picture down in Ethiopia was looked like just a big old bowl of some sort. So we don't know where the ark is, and some people say that they do, but at this point we don't know. Let me pull the chat up so that I can see what's going on. And okay, now let's go ahead and look at, I think we're here. Okay, now I thought we were going to get to Nehemiah tonight. And so I thought, here's the walls that Nehemiah worked on and so forth. We'll look at this closer next week. There was just too much stuff tonight to get to that. So let's go ahead and look at the next thing here. And that is this timeline here that kind of gives you an idea of where these things occurred, because I was having a hard time fixing it in my mind when all of these things occurred. And then when you read Ezra, it gets real confusing in there, because it'll say one thing, say something, and then the very next verse, it says something else, and it kind of leads you to believe that, oh my, this just they got it all wrong. But no, there's like 50 or 60 years between verse 5, chapter 4, verse 5, and then chapter 6, or between 6 and 7, whatever. There was a total of 50 years in there, and like 3 kings later. So this kind of tells you, okay, the temple was completed in 516, and Zerubbabel had led 50,000 people. Roughly, it was 49,000 and change, but he led them after the decree of Cyrus in 539, 538, and so they started building the temple, and then the temple was finally completed, but not without a lot of hassle. And we'll look at that in a minute. And then this also kind of shows you, where did Queen Esther fall into all of this, because her husband was part of all of this. Xerxes, or Xerxes was Ahasuerus. Okay, that's who her husband was, and his Greek name then being Xerxes, but Ahasuerus, and that would have been right in this period here. Okay, and then we'll see then tonight where Ezra comes back in at this point, and then next week we'll look at this part over here, and you'll see that Haggai and Zechariah were the prophets during this particular time, and then Malachi finishes out the Old Testament for us. All right, and here is a list. Now, last week I had, the last time we met, I had a list of the kings of Babylon, and how they fell into place. Here is the a list of the kings of the Persian Empire, and actually there's another. I mean, they go on even further down here with an Artaxerxes II and a Darius III, but they didn't play into the biblical story, so I didn't put them in here. But here's just a kind of so you can keep in your mind Cyrus. Of course, he's the one that decreed that the captives could go back to Judah, and then Cambyses, the second. He didn't last. I mean, he was Cyrus's son, but he didn't stick around all that long, and he was kind of lackluster anyway. And then Darius came along. Now Darius was he was very, very successful in conquering things, and so he greatly just expanded the Persian Empire from the Medo-Persian Empire. He greatly expanded. Okay, and I neglected to put there. He's the one that decreed that the temple could go ahead and be built, because the people had written to Cambyses and said, you know, these Jews, they're messing things up, and they're gonna really go against you, and they're going to have this temple, and they're going to revolt against you, and all that kind of stuff. And so you better just shut it down. And so he did. But then Darius came along and said, no, because it's already been decreed that they can do this, and so go ahead and continue. But it was still like 14 years of harassment. We'll get into that. Okay, Xerxes the first, that was the husband of Esther. Okay, and then Artaxerxes, we'll see what he does here later on. And then Darius the second, right at the tail end. He was a very weak king, even though he lasted for almost 20 years. He was kind of a disappointment, and his administration was kind of a disaster. All right, so any comments or questions so far that we've gotten into this? I know that was kind of a whirlwind tour, but if we went into all the politics and everything, it'd take me a week to get through that. All right, any comments or questions? Okay, let's look at Ezra then. Ezra 4:1-2. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple for Adonai, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the leading patriarchs and said to them, "Let us build with you, for like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." All right. Well, now that was really these guys, the enemies of Judah and Benjamin. Who were they? Well, they were the mixed blood people that that had been up there in the northern tribes. And when Assyria came in and took the cream of the crop out, and then they shipped in a whole bunch of Assyrians into there to basically to assimilate into the area, or at least get to draw the Jews, dilute their bloodline enough, and inject their own gods and theologies and all of that kind of stuff to basically break down the Jewishness of the worship of Adonai that was sort of there in the northern kingdom, but really never was. But they wanted to break that down so that everybody then would, they felt like that in keeping their empire going, that they could, if they had more of a homogeneous religion across the Assyrian Empire, that it would be stronger for them. So that's why they did that. But they brought these people in, they intermarried, and so we're talking, a couple of 100 years now of this sort of goings on, and these people that brought their own religion in, but there were still some enough of the Judaism in there that they said, okay, well, you can do your stuff too, and we'll just add our stuff with it, and just mix it all together, and what a nice cake we'll have. And so the northern tribes that were still there, they said, yeah, okay, that's fine. And so what did they do? Their capital was up in Samaria, and up there in Samaria on Mount Gerizim. they would do their sacrifices. They had their own temple there, and they would do sacrifices. And in fact, if you go back up there today, there are Samaritans who they have a form of religion that looks a lot like Judaism. I mean, they have a Passover and they and all of that kind of stuff. And that's what we find then in this time where Zerubbabel was trying to rebuild the temple. They have these guys coming in there and say, well, they said their offer of help was total subterfuge. It's like what Ronald Reagan said, the scariest words in the English language is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Well, these guys say, well, we're from the Sumerian government and we're here to help. We'll help you rebuild your temple, because after all, we're serving the same God, right? How many times have we heard that, oh, we all have the same God. It's all the same, isn't it? No, it's not. Okay. So that's, and I've talked about their sacrifices were a contaminated, diluted, just a messed up version of Judaism. All right. So Zerubbabel was not fooled for a second, but Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest, he's the high priest, and the rest of the prominent patriarchs of Israel said to them, it is not for you and us to build a house for our God, but we alone will build it for Adonai, the God of Israel, just as Cyrus, king of Persia, has commanded us. Then the people of the land began discouraging the people of Judah and making them afraid to build. They bribed advisors in order to thwart their plans all the days of King Cyrus of Persia until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Okay, now, so like I said, Zerubbabel saw all through this. I mean, they didn't fool him for a minute, and so he refused their assistance. All of his advisors, all of his leaders were all the same mind, and they said, nope, it's not for you who are not pure blood or whatever you are. It's not for you and us to build. It's for us alone to build. And so, sometimes you just have to put your foot down and say, no, I need to keep this pure. And that we find that a lot today in our world, where there's all sorts of compromises being offered for the way that we should believe and the way that we should behave. And the Bible clearly shows us here, even with the Zerubbabel back, 2,500 years ago, that what we have to do is we have to remain true to what we should be doing, and that's us building the temple for the Lord. And so then the discouragement came in all sorts of ways. I mean, from they would go through there and deny permits or something. But even back then, you don't think of it, like today we have such a bureaucracy and so forth. Well, evidently even back then they had types of bureaucracy, and they would try to delay the building at any cost. Oh, well, you need that mortar. Well, let's see in our book how much the tax on that mortar is going to be. Well, and then what you need these hammers and chisels to cut the stone. Oh, well, no hammers or chisels are allowed right now, and that sort of stuff. Or and just in the case, that harassing with maybe physical danger, because it said the people were afraid to build, and government officials being bribed. Oh my! Can you imagine a government official that would allow himself to be bribed? That just couldn't happen, could it? Well, yeah, it did happen 2,500 years ago, and it's still happening today. It's, I guess you could say that's a time-honored tradition. And so this harassment lasted about 14 years. And so what I need to do is, okay, let's see. The rebuilding of it finally commenced in 520 BCE, the second year of Darius's reign. And then it was finished off 4 years later. It took them 4 years. Once they'd got back to starting to doing it, kind of interesting. God said that he's going to have them in exile for 70 years. Well, if you count from the time that the temple was destroyed till the time that the temple was rebuilt, it's exactly 70 years. Now, of course, that doesn't count. That's not the exile, because the exile was shifted over a little bit because they'd been in the land already 20 years or so. So, but the exile was from 605, I think, is when the first Babylonian exile happened. You know, they carried off people from. That's when Daniel and his pals got sent off to Babylon, and then it was again 70 years from that Cyrus says, no, you can go home now, and you know, God kept his word. He was going to keep them out of the land for 70 years, and he did. All right. So then it was the people around. Now that's where I got all messed up here. It says they bribed advisors to thwart their plans all the days of King Cyrus of Persia until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And so then, you know, when you look at verse 6, which for some reason I didn't write down here, it says, also in those days they wrote a letter to Artaxerxes. And I said, wait a minute, you know, you got Darius, the king of Persia. Then all of a sudden they says, and also they wrote to Artaxerxes. Well, that was 50 years later. And then it finally, after I looked at all of this stuff and figured it out, it says, oh yeah, in the writing of this thing, the writer of Ezra did not say, oh yeah, and in 50 years later, they were still harassing the people of Jerusalem, and they sent a letter to Artaxerxes. And it's the way it's written, it's almost like they're talking about the temple, but no, the temple had long been built. They were talking about renewing the walls and the infrastructure of Jerusalem in that verse 6 then. All right. So then I think I'm trying to figure out, okay, that's all of the time situation. Is anyone, have you got it all figured out, or you just don't care? Or I mean, about the dates, a lot of people, years and numbers and dates, just they don't care. And but I have to say that it gets me. I sure care about it, because I get confused easily. Goodwin.
No, and you made a good point just now at the very beginning. That's where I sometimes fail when I read, that I don't see, you go from one verse to the next and you don't see there are a bunch of decades or sometimes centuries between the two.
Exactly.
And so when I read, I just sometimes get lost, and I go back a couple of times and I'm still lost until I remember. You need to look at the time. So it's a good point anyway.
Yeah, and that's why I have added these timelines in there that will kind of give us an idea of when these things came about. I mean, like here's a timeline that helps us out, and then this timeline, this chronology of the return, that kind of helps us.
Completely agree. Yeah, that helps tremendously.
And then, the idea of, okay, well, when did Esther fall into this? Was there really an Esther? Did she even exist? Of course she existed. And her husband was Xerxes, or Ahasuerus. And so the same guy, just a different name. Okay, so let's go back down into, I wanted to look at Haggai, or if you're from Texas, it's Haggai. Okay. And just a note that he made to the people. What did they do? What did the people do when they were told, well, you can't work on the temple? And they said, okay, no problem. We'll just work on our own houses, and we'll build our houses. And evidently then the zeal or the enthusiasm for wanting to rebuild the temple was just kind of lost on everybody. And so Haggai's coming back in there and saying, hey guys, you need to get back to this. So, even though that there was a prohibition against rebuilding the temple, evidently they figured out that, nobody really cares in the city of Susa or Shushan, whichever name you want to use. They really don't care if we rebuild the temple, because it's not going to it's not a threat to the empire at all. So Haggai's trying to say, okay, let's go back and do this. So hey, it was just kind of interesting. I pulled this up. Is it a time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses, while this house lies in ruins? But now says Adonai Svaot, that's Adonai, the Lord of hosts. And somebody asked me that, what does Svaot mean? Set your heart on your ways. You sowed much, but bring in little. You eat, but are never satisfied. You drink, but not enough to get filled. You put on clothes, but no one is warm. And whoever earns wages works for a bag full of holes. And so what he's telling them there is that, you're not putting God first here. Guys, you're tending to your own business. You got paneled houses, instead of just rock. They've got the rock walls, and then they've come in there with wooden panels, and they've got wooden paneling in their house, and all sorts of nice stuff. And so he's telling them, you have concentrated now on doing what you want to do, and yet because of that, everything that you're doing just kind of comes to naught. Your pockets are full of holes. You put your wages in your pocket, in your bag, and they just dribble out because it's full of holes. Well, that's because, guys, you're not putting God first. You're not putting his temple first before you do your own thing. So Haggai was trying to push them into getting back to the business at hand of working on the temple. And so I just said all of that. But he's saying, if you put God first, then you will prosper. The Bible tells us over and over again that if you put God first, he will bless you, he'll prosper you, and rebuke the devourer for you. And I mean, we got a little story about somebody that Randy yesterday said that he came to worship, and his car was acting up, and so he says, pray for my car. Well, some people say, yeah, pray for your car. Hey, I have done that lots of times when I was young and didn't have a whole lot of money, and my car would conk out on me, and I didn't know how to fix it because I'm not a mechanic, okay? And I hate working on cars. And I say, Lord, I don't know what's wrong with this silly thing, but you need to fix it. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to crank it up, and it needs to run so that we could go home. And so I go in there, and it cranked right up, went home, and so God does that for us. I mean, it's just a kindness that he does. And so it's kind of like what we talked about in the membership class yesterday, that God is not out of the miracle working business. He still is in the miracle working business for us because we're his children. He likes to do good things for us. So anyway, that period of time that Haggai is talking about here, it's the work stopped. It was maybe about 10 years or so. They've laid the foundation. They were building. Then they got this order to cease and desist. So they stopped building, and in stopping the building, they got involved with their own houses, fixing up their own places. They started fixing up their own houses very nicely, but then they just left off the Lord. And so Haggai's crying out to the people for saying, don't do this. You're going in and doing your own thing, and you're neglecting the Lord. So your pocketbook, your pockets have holes in them. So let's get back to the business of building the temple again. All right. So here's a chronology of Ezra. And I think I've got that. Yeah, I've got that in my notes, and I wanted to put this out for you because this again puts it. Now you'll see here every once in a while when the year, it may be a year or two different. It may say 536 or 537 or 537 or 538 in a couple of different chronologies, but it's because of the way the calendars, and sometimes things are just not that clear in the telling of the stories, so to speak, of history. So then here's where we were just talking about Haggai telling the people, okay, let's get back to work. And so the temple work began again on 520 because Darius had come to power in 522, 523, that time frame. And so it was in his second year of his reign that the temple building, it started going, it was resumed, and it took them about 4 years. And so they finished it off in 516, and then they dedicated in 515. And so let's and my monitor's playing silly games on me. Okay, so now we're going to get into Ezra coming into Israel. Okay, and he's coming from Babylon, and we'll go into. All right, let me see if I can get this. There we go. Now, after these things, during the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, and son of Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Shallum, son of Zadok, son of Ahitub, and son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Marioth, son of Zerahiah, son of Uzi, son of Buki, son of Abushua, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the Kohen Gadol. Okay, now did you notice? Okay, go on. This Ezra came up from Babylon. He was a scribe, skilled in the Torah of Moses that Adonai, the God of Israel, had given. The king granted him everything he requested because the hand of Adonai, his God, was upon him. All right, did you notice that they got a genealogy there? And it starts out, with Ezra, his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, his great-great, it goes on right on back up to, is the son of Phinehas, Pinchas, which we just, we studied that just recently in our Parshas. Then the son of Eleazar, who was the son of Aaron, the first high priest. So Ezra had all of the, he had that bloodline. He was pure Kohen, right from the Kohen Gadol, the high priest Aaron, and it's a direct descendant of him. So Ezra had every right then to be, he was a priest, he was a Kohen, he had every right to be also a high priest, but that was not what God had him do. And there was another person that was the high priest, and Ezra did other things. He was the governor of the people there. And so, again, you look and say, well, he had all the bona fides there that of being a high priest. Why didn't he take over and be the high priest? Because he understood that God doesn't make mistakes. God didn't put him in that position as a high priest, even though it would have been very prestigious and just something that a lot of men aspired to. Ezra was more interested in bringing Torah to the people in a different way. He was the governor. He was working with people. He could make things happen that the high priest could not do. And so it says that he was highly skilled in Torah. I mean, he was a scribe. He was one of these guys that not only was he a priest, but this guy was, in today's world, we would say, well, he had his PhD in Torah. And he was very, very learned in Torah. And not only that, he was very, very highly favored by Artaxerxes. Now, that's a God thing right there. When you've got a Jewish guy that he is very well schooled in Torah, and then the king, the most powerful guy on earth at that time, says, you know what, Ezra, I think you're cool. I like you. And, you want to go back to your homeland, your people. Now, see, Ezra was born in Persia, in Babylon area. He was not born in Israel. He was not a native son. And so, but Artaxerxes said, you would like to go back to your people and your homeland, as it were. So I'm going to let you do it. Now, I think some of the writing here is pretty incredible. So looking at verse 7 here, some of Bnei Israel and some of the Kohanim, the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the sanctuary servants also came up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. He arrived in Jerusalem, Ezra, arrived in Jerusalem in the 5th month of the 7th year of the king. He began his aliyah from Babylon, the aliyah going up to Jerusalem from Babylon on the 1st day of the 1st month, and entered Jerusalem on the 1st day of the 5th month, because the good hand of his God was upon him. For Ezra had set his heart to seek the Torah of Adonai, to observe and to teach its statutes and ordinances in Israel. So it took him, from the 1st month to the 5th month, it took him 4 or 5 months to get from Babylon back over to Jerusalem. Well, why would it take them that long? Well, that's because they had to go up and follow the water. They had a lot of people with them, and they had to follow where they had water. So they had to go back up over the Euphrates and down. They couldn't just cut right straight across, because there would have been no water for them, and they would have all died. And so that's why it took 4 or 5 months, and it would have even taken them longer, but they said the hand of God was on them. All right. So, and still, I'm not getting any questions from anybody. So if you do have comments or questions, just jump in there. All right. Now, here, I wanted to point out again what was in Ezra's heart. He said he set his heart to seek the Torah of Adonai, to observe and to teach its statutes and ordinances in Israel. So not only did he want to just go and study Torah, he had already studied Torah. He was very learned in that. He was a scribe, an expert in Torah. He wanted to bring it back to his people in Israel or in Judah, and teach them all of the statutes, all the ordinance, everything about it. He wanted to bring that to his people. So Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the Kohen, a scribe of the law of the God of heaven. This is the letter. This is the proclamation, or the letter of safe passage that Artaxerxes is giving to Ezra. I have now issued a decree that anyone in my kingdom from the people of Israel, even the Kohanim and the Levites who wish to go up to Jerusalem with you may go. For you are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to inquire about Judah and Jerusalem with regard to the law of your God, which is in your hand. And if you bring this, and to bring silver and gold that the king and his counselors have freely given to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, together with all of the silver and gold that you find in the whole province of Babylon, as well as the free will offerings of the people and the Kohanim for the house of their God in Jerusalem. Furthermore, with this silver, you should be sure to buy bulls and rams, and along with their grain offerings and their drink offerings, and offer them on the altar of your God, on the altar of your God in Jerusalem. You may do whatever seems good to you and your brothers with the remaining silver and gold, according to the will of your God. The vessels that you are entrusted, that are entrusted to you for the service of the house of your God, deliver before the God of Jerusalem. The rest of the needs for the house of your God, that you may have occasion to supply, you may provide from the royal treasury. Wow, that's incredible. But that's not it. You know, it keeps on coming. I, King Artaxerxes, hereby issue a decree to all the treasurers of Trans-Euphrates to diligently provide all that Ezra the Kohen, scribe of the law of the God of heaven, may ask of you, up to 10 or 100 talents of silver, up to 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of oil, and salt without limit. Everything that the God of heaven has required, let it be done with diligence for the house of the God of heaven. For why should there be wrath against the realm of the king and his sons? We also notify you that you have no authority to impose tribute, tax, or duty on any of the Kohanim, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, sanctuary servants, or attendants at this house of God. Now you, Ezra, according to the wisdom of your God, that is in your hand, appoint judges and magistrates who may administer justice to all the people in the Trans-Euphrates, all who know the laws of your God, and you are to teach those who do not know them. All right. So, I mean, I find this just to be an incredible declaration that he would say that, okay, you're going to go back, you're going to rebuild, you're going to fix up that temple, and you're going to reestablish your religion in your home. Now, again, remember that back in those days, the idea that these people had was that gods were local. There was not a universal God of everything. Like, you know, we know Adonai is he's everywhere. He's omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, all of those things. In those days, gods were regional. Everybody thought of their God as regional. And so, but, you know, some gods were more powerful than the others. And so Artaxerxes looked at this and he says, you know what, this is, I've seen stuff with this God and I know that he's powerful. And so why should I make him mad at me? Why should I anger him so that he comes down on me? Even though he's from Jerusalem, he's still powerful enough that he could come down on me. So I want to bless all of his people and I want to do all of these offerings. And so, you know, God had put that in his heart. That's something that God had to put in Artaxerxes, because in the natural, I don't think he would have been that way. And so, I mean, here he was, he could do anything he could, up to 100 talents of silver and wheat and the wine and the oil, and it said salt without limit. Why salt without limit? What is salt? Well, salt was a measure of payment. Roman soldiers were paid in salt, and so that's why we talk today about someone being, he's worth his salt, or he's not worth his salt, meaning he was not worth the wage that they paid him in salt. Okay, and Another cool thing is that all of the people who were ministers in the temple, they got a tax exemption. You know, how cool is that? There was a 501c3 even way back then, and he gave these guys a tax exemption that they did not have to pay taxes back to the empire. All right. So now it keeps on going, though. I think not, you know, beyond that, he says, let everyone who does not observe the law of your God and the law of the king be punished with due diligence, whether it is death or banishment, confiscation of goods or imprisonment. Blessed be Adonai, the God of our fathers, who has put it in. And this is Ezra saying this. Blessed be Adonai, the God of our fathers, who's put it into the heart of the king to beautify the house of Adonai in Jerusalem in this way, and who has extended loving kindness to me before the king and his counselors and all the king's mighty princes. I gained strength as the hand of Adonai, my God, was upon me, and I gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. So Ezra looked at this, and he's incredulous that, you know, the king would do all this stuff. It's amazing. And so, you know, rather than saying, you know what, I must be pretty good that the king would do that. No, he says, bless God that he has done this for me. It's him. He did all of this for me. And that's why this is all happening, because God is gracious. All right. So, now, that was, come on down here. I think I caught up with my notes. It was incredible to me then that he would also talk about, you know, that, you know, if you don't do this, if you don't follow God's law over there in Judah, then Ezra has the authority to do whatever it takes, you know, from death, you know, death down to fine and imprisonment, you know, whatever he thought was appropriate, that's okay with me. So then we get into chapter 8 of Ezra, and chapter 8 is just a telling of they're bringing the silver and the gold and all that stuff into the temple, and that they turn it over to the priests. The priests guard the silver and gold, and they take an inventory of it. And so that it's just saying that, yes, we safely delivered this to the temple, just like the king told us to. Now, we get into some strange stuff here in chapters 9 and 10. Many of the people had intermarried with foreigners, with people in Canaan, you know, because like I said, they had been there now for 20 years. And so they intermarried with people that were there in Jerusalem and in Judah and the area around Jerusalem. And so they get there, and then they remember they're reading God's word, and he says, do not intermarry with the people who are not followers of the God of Israel. Do not do it. So they understood that this was displeasing to God. Ezra went into mourning, tore his garments, and so forth. And so the people were concerned about this, because their leader now he's heard from God. And they are saying, well, if this is going to cause us, you know, are we going to die? Are we going to be carried back to Babylon? Are we going to lose everything that we've got here? And so they were concerned that God may punish them for the act of some who had married the foreigners. So Ezra didn't really know what to do. The Bible says that he went in and prayed to God, and you know, almost all of chapter 9 is his prayer to God, just say, yeah, we've sinned, we've done this, these people have intermarried, and I know you told us not to do that, but it was done anyway. We're begging your forgiveness. And so what should we do? And while he's doing this, his advisors come in and says, I know, we'll just send everybody that has married a foreigner. They're just going to have to dismiss that marriage, annul it, divorce them, or whatever. However, we're going to dissolve that marriage, and send the foreigner away. And so that's what they were going to do. There were wives, and then there were some children in these marriages. But, for having all of that, the Bible says, well, you know what? It was the rainy season, and the weather was very messy. The land was very messy, and it was a logistic nightmare how to handle all of this stuff, and also legally challenging, because they would have had to go through a beit din, a rabbinic court, so that they could go in and figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? Because it's kind of implied there that they wanted to do right by the foreigners, foreign women, and not just, at least they didn't. God didn't say, well, let's just kill them all. No, no. It's just they felt like that God was telling them to just put them away. And so they would have to have somehow come up with compensation for the women so that they would not starve. And but they had to be separated away from Jerusalem and away from Judah, because it was contaminating the pure worship of God, and they wanted to start fresh with a clean slate. Now, this was this was a very difficult thing. I would think I would see that as extremely difficult, and not everybody agreed. There were people, and the Bible lists them by name. Said, yeah, most everybody agreed, but these ones did not agree. And but the majority complied. The Bible doesn't say if it was a 100% compliance, but the majority did comply. They put the wives away, and some of it says the people were very, very sad about this. I mean, it was heart-wrenching for them to do that. And so anyhow, that ends then Ezra, the book of Ezra, and then next week we'll get into the book of Nehemiah. All right. So are there any comments or questions? I got one comment. Nobody reminded me to record this thing when we first started, but that's okay. I've got it on Facebook, and we can recover it from there. Any comments or questions? I'm going to go ahead and close out the Facebook feed at this point. And I'll tell everybody that's watching on Facebook, Shavua Tov, have a good week.